Keep right, and then exit right.
All right. Good evening, everyone. This is John Tapp with the
Exit right.
Kenworth 900 W900, which is the 86-inch studio sleeper
Turn left.
that is I bought in Los Angeles. I'm gonna start from there. I gotta go get some juices from the next city, and in fact, let's all get the drinks over and get it out of that state. So let's get moving, folks.
Get ready to turn right. Turn right. It's all over now. Okay, here we go. Get ready to turn left. Turn left. ready to turn right. Turn right. Keep left.
You're listening to All
Keep
Things
left.
Considered from NPR News.
It's 5:44 and this is News 88.7 in depth. I'm Gail DeLauder. A federal district court this week blocked a Louisiana law that would have required the placement of the Ten Commandments in every public school classroom in the state. Louisiana is all but certain to appeal the decision. That sets up the possibility of a Supreme Court fight. News 88.7 government reporter Andrew Schneider says the case has implications for Texas, which is set to revive a similar bill lawmakers failed to pass last year.
In 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a long-standing precedent involving the First Amendment's Establishment Clause, which prohibits the government, including public schools, from endorsing one religion over another. That opened the door to bills like this one in Texas last year.
The chair lays out Senate Bill 1515 by Senator King.
SB 1515 mandated the placement of the Ten Commandments in every public school classroom in Texas. Here's the bill's author, Republican State Senator Phil King, speaking before the Senate Committee on Education.
But this is the same translation that is actually on the monument on
Keep
our
left.
Texas State Capitol grounds over on the north side.
The argument in favor of putting the Ten Commandments in classrooms is twofold. King laid out the first part in explaining how the High Court had eliminated the previous precedent.
And instead looking to America's history and tradition for whether the government may recognize our religious heritage.
The history and tradition argument holds that the Ten Commandments are a legal document that influenced the founding of the country, alongside the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, and should be displayed in schools as they are. Reverend Dave Welch, head of the Texas Pastor Council, supported the bill.
The relevance and the historical respect for that as part of who we are as a nation is irrefutable, and having shaped our culture. And it's not a matter of forcing religious beliefs on anybody.
But many legal scholars, including Stephen T. Collis of the University of Texas at Austin, argue that even with the Establishment Clause weakened, there are some lines the Supreme Court isn't likely to cross.
Posting the Ten Commandments in a public school is arguably coercing religion upon students because you're forcing them to look at a particular religious text specific to a few religions in the world in a closed environment where the students can't escape.
And that gets to the second argument supporters of such legislation use. Placing the Ten Commandments in schools is a way of improving public education by teaching morals and ethics. Tara Beulah of Cyprus spoke in favor of SB 1515 before the Senate Education Committee.
There's no such thing as separation of church and state in the Constitution. We are a Christian nation, and we should start acting like one.
That, in a nutshell, is the position of Christian nationalism. And it's a real problem for a wide range of Texans who view it as discriminatory, not just against non-Christians, but against Christians who don't share Christian nationalist theology. Democratic State Representative James Tallarico, a seminary student, was a staunch opponent of SB 1515.
My faith means more to me than anything, and I firmly believe that there is nothing Christian about Christian nationalism. I think bills like this one are not only unconstitutional, not only un-American, but they're also deeply un-Christian.
SB 1515 passed the Senate on a party line vote, but died when the House ran out of time at the end of the regular session. After Louisiana passed its Ten Commandments display law earlier this year, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick swore Texas would pass a version in 2025. With a larger, more conservative GOP majority in the House, Patrick may get his wish, but the resulting law will almost certainly wind up in court alongside Louisiana's. For News 88.7 In Depth, I'm Andrew Schneider.
I'm Natalie Weber with Houston Public Media's Fort Bend County Bureau. What I enjoy about my job is that I get to cover a little bit of everything, whether that's city council, school board meetings, businesses, or even just interesting local stories. I get to be really involved in the community and see all different aspects. I think Fort Bend County is really unique because it's a very diverse place and there's a lot of people with really deep connections to the area.
Hello Houston is a daily newsletter for the busy person on the go, delivered to your inbox every morning with a quick recap of the previous day and a look ahead at the current day's news. Sign up today at houstonpublicmedia.org/Hello Houston.
Support comes from Nuestra Palabras, global reading series sponsored by the Brown Foundation and BENF, presenting writer Dagoberto Guild and visual artist Cesar Martinez, Tuesday, November 19th, 6 p.m. at TBH. More at HoustonReads.org. And Signify Business Cash by Wells Fargo. With its business credit card, cardholders can earn rewards on business purchases with no caps or categories to track. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/signify. Terms apply. And Specs Wine, Spirits, and Finer Foods. Texas family owned and operated since 1962. Offering a large selection of wine, spirits, and beers to choose from. Details at specsonline.com. The fun starts here. This is News 88.7. I'm Brenda Valdivia. 610 North Loop going eastbound at Hardy Toll Road. 45 North going northbound at West Road. Both have accidents. The one on 45 northbound at West Road was just clear, but traffic still catching up. Tonight will be low around 51 degrees, clear skies. You can expect the same weather tomorrow as today, high in the upper 70s, sunny skies. It's currently 74 degrees here at the University of Houston. This is News 88.7.
NPR News. This is All Things Considered. I'm Elsa Chang.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. It's time now for our Science News Roundup from Shortwave, NPR's science podcast. And I am joined here in the studio by the show's two hosts, Regina Barber and Emily Kwong. So good to see both your faces.
So good to see you, too. It's so nice to be here with you, Ari.
Well, as usual, you've brought us 3 science stories that caught your attention this week. What are they?
A newly identified deep-sea creature. The benefits of exercise for healing our nervous system. And science-backed tips for holiday eating.
Let's start by going deep. What's down there?
So much stuff you don't want to know. No, we're going to talk about this mysterious creature. Yeah, discovered in 2000, and now for the first time described in detail in the journal Deep Sea Research Part 1 by scientists at MBARI. That's the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute in California.
I love Monterey Bay. It's an amazing place.
Yes,
Agreed.
yes. And they call this creature off their shores Bathydevius cadactylus.
How devious is it?
We're going to get into that because for a long time they called it the mystery mollusk. The mystery mollusk.
What's so mysterious about it?
Yeah, well, one of the researchers, Bruce Robeson, he said that at first he and his colleagues couldn't figure out what it was.
It's a pretty funny-looking animal if you get right down to it. It sort of looks like it was made up from spare parts left over from making a bunch of other animals.
Oh, like a sphinx or a griffin. No, I'm guessing that's not what it actually looks like.
Picture a jellyfish crossed with a slug, adorned with this cape-like hood, and the whole thing is transparent, so you can see right through it. And it can glow in the dark, this creature, because it's bioluminescent.
I think I'm in love.
You want to see a picture?
I would love to. Ooh. It's got like little things in the middle of it. What's going on there? Can you just describe what this looks like?
It's kind of see-through. There's these like 3 pops of color inside of its body.
Yeah.
The thing that looks like a dried up orange is its digestive gland. And the bright red stomach looks like a cherry. And that white patch, that's its brain.
Wow, and researchers had no idea what it was?
But now they do. Through much observation and also DNA sequencing, they were able to confirm that this is a nudibranch.
Oh, I actually, from tide pooling as a kid in Oregon, I am obsessed with nudibranchs. They're like the punk rockers of the sea. Sea slugs, basically, right?
Yeah, but this creature, like, it didn't look like any other nudibranch they'd ever seen.
No, it doesn't.
This is the only nudibranch we know of so far that swims in the deep water of the midnight zone. That's the middle zone of the ocean between the sunlit shallow waters and the sea floor. This creature goes deep.
I'm so glad to learn about this creature.
Yeah, I know. Bruce told us it's a testament to how much we don't know about the deep sea, despite it being the largest ecosystem on the planet, and why it's so important to do this kind of work.
If we're ever to live in harmony with our planet, we better understand all that's out there and how it all works. Otherwise, we're liable to screw it up.
All right, from the deep sea, let's pivot to exercise. What is the new discovery about exercise?
It's so good for us. That's the end of the story.
Like
That's the end of the story. We can end. We can wrap this up right here. But it's good for us in ways we're uncovering even yet. Like, it's good for our brain, our immune system, our bones and muscles, but also our nervous system.
So what does that mean, actually?
So specifically are like motor neurons, the cells in our body that attach to your muscles and control your movement. A research team at MIT wanted to know how muscles and neurons talk to each other, specifically during exercise.
How did they measure that?
They created a mini muscle factory. They took a petri dish and they popped in some muscle fibers from mice, grew them, and generated this small sheet of tissue about the size of a quarter.
The team then stimulated the muscle over and over again, mimicking like what happens during exercise. And when the muscles contracted, they released this soup of biochemicals called myokines.
The team, led by Ritu Raman, then collected these delicious myokines and fed them to motor neurons.
And what we saw is that the neurons grew 4 times faster and farther when they had this chemical soup versus when they didn't.
So is the takeaway here that exercise helps promote nerve growth? Is that what they found?
Yes, in this experiment, that chemical soup created by those muscles helped with these motor neurons. In a separate experiment, Ritu jiggled the motor neurons, like using magnets, kind of simulating exercise, and just the physical forces help the neurons grow just as well. No chemicals required.
I'm picturing like those 80s exercise machines where a strap just kind of wobbles you back and forth and it's supposed to have some positive impact.
I totally remember those commercials.
Yeah, they kind of did that to these neurons, proving that exercise really is medicine, helping to promote nerve growth, which ultimately could improve mobility.
Yeah, and that's important to human health. There's so many situations where communication between muscles and motor neurons breaks down, from a traumatic muscle injury to a neurodegenerative disease like ALS.
So Ritu hopes that this study, published in the journal Advanced Healthcare Materials this week, adds to a growing body of knowledge on how these cells interact and how mobility can be recovered.
Okay, we've discussed exercise. Now let's get to feasting.
Yes.
Tips for getting through the holidays. What do we need to know?
Yeah, well, first let's start with the findings of a poll that sparked this reporting. Last month, this hospital group in Florida called Orlando Health surveyed over 1,000 Americans nationally and found that during the holidays, some people try to counteract eating big meals in unhealthy ways. So tips today that we're going to talk about are about promoting healthy thinking and eating instead.
Take it away. What are the tips?
Okay. Ari scooted forward to the table.
Ready.
A little bit
Let's
more.
do it.
All right. Come up to our science-backed holiday eating buffet table. Tip number 1, don't skip meals before the big holiday feast.
I actually don't have that problem.
Okay.
I'm not one to skip meals.
Well, Ari, 1 in 4 people surveyed thought that was a good idea.
Okay, I'm just going to have coffee, or I'm not going to eat until dinner. And that's really counterproductive to what we should be doing.
That's Shauna Manai Spence, a registered dietitian, not involved in the survey, but she suggests eating small meals with protein and fiber throughout the day and says that will keep you from overeating like during the big meal.
Overeating, I thought, was the whole point of the holidays. Okay, what's tip number 2?
Tip 2, ditch those detoxes you see online. You know the ones I'm talking about, because you can be thankful for your kidneys and liver, those organs, for detoxing and filtering out stuff your body doesn't want. Shauna and the dietitians at Orlando Health made it clear you don't need any sort of over-the-counter or home remedy. They don't live up to the true detox promise, and they're a waste of money and can sometimes even be harmful.
No binging on celery juice and chili pepper, huh?
No, she calls it spicy water. But Shauna also warns that, like, anyone can call themselves a nutritionist, but to be a dietitian in many states, you need credentials. So she advises to, like, be wary of advice from TikTok or Instagram.
Noted. Okay, what's your final tip?
Tip number 3, dig into those holiday foods and just enjoy yourself, Ari, and everyone else.
That one I can take on board.
Shauna wants to stress self-compassion. Like, these meals are social and they bring us joy.
Please don't let it overconsume you or make you feel guilty like you're this horrible person or that you have no self-control. Take a deep breath. It's okay.
Because in reality, one rich meal is not going to affect your health significantly, just like one healthy meal isn't going to suddenly make you a Greek god.
Or Greek yogurt, for that matter.
Absolutely.
I love Greek yogurt.
You can have that the morning after.
Yeah, with the cranberry sauce stirred in. It's really delicious. That's Emily Kwong and Regina Barber from NPR Science Podcast Shortwave. You can subscribe now for new discoveries, everyday mysteries, and the science behind the headlines. Thank you both.
Thank you, Ari.
Thank you.
Listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from the law firm Cooley LLP. With offices in the U.S., Europe, and Asia, Cooley advises new and established companies, investors, and financial institutions around the world where innovation meets the law. From the Kauffman Foundation, providing access to opportunities that help people achieve financial stability, upward mobility, and economic prosperity, regardless of race, gender, or geography. Kauffman.org. From the FDA, its Remove the Risk campaign encourages people to dispose of the unused and unwanted opioid medications in their homes. Learn more at fda.gov/remove the risk. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
This is News 88.7. I'm Brenda Valdivia. Tonight's low around 50 degrees with clear skies. If you like today's weather, tomorrow will be the same. High around 77, sunny skies back again. And by the weekend, we have partly sunny skies and a slight chance of showers by Sunday night. It's currently 74 degrees and fair here at the University of Houston. Support comes from Senior Health Services, helping Houston area seniors who are concerned about changes in their Medicare plan by providing a variety of options, including Medicare supplements, Medicare Advantage, and Part D drug plans. More at seniorhealthservices.com. 610 North Loop going eastbound at Hardy Toll Road has an accident. This is your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston. Listen to your latest episodes of Houston Matters and other shows on our website, houstonpublicmedia.org. It's 6 o'clock.
We should gain access to all relevant information by whatever means necessary.
Some Senate Republicans say they need to know more before casting any vote to confirm Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz as the next Attorney General.
For Thursday, November 14th, this is All Things Considered from NPR News.
I'm Elson Shea.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. This hour, a closer look at the affiliations and personal views of the man chosen to be the next Secretary of Defense.
So I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't
made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated.
Also, how companies like Spotify are using AI to bring a personal DJ right to your phone.
This incredibly realistic but also warm voice that makes people want to engage and listen to the DJ and follow their recommendations.
And lawmakers held a hearing to look into the possibility of aliens in space.
First, this news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. President-elect Donald Trump has tap-noted vaccine skeptic Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to head the agency that oversees public health programs, including the Food and Drug Administration. Trump is nominating RFK Jr. to be Secretary of Health and Human Services. Your Stephen Fowler has more.
If he's confirmed by the Senate, the role gives Kennedy the chance to actualize a vision that's often at odds with mainstream health and science, likely through a combination of scaling back existing programs and refocusing others to align with his, quote, "Make America Healthy Again" goals. He told NPR that the government isn't going to take away vaccines from anybody, but said the science on vaccine safety has huge deficits. Now, vaccine experts disagree with that assessment.
NPR's Stephen Fowler. HHS also oversees the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, National Institutes of Health, and Medicare and Medicaid. Kennedy ran as an independent presidential candidate before dropping out in August and throwing his support behind Trump. And more nominations to announce. Tonight, Trump has chosen his personal attorney, Todd Blanche, as his Deputy Attorney General. If confirmed, Blanche would be second to Trump's Attorney General nominee, former Florida Representative Matt Gaetz. Other announced picks are former Georgia Congressman Doug Collins to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs and Dean John Sauer, Solicitor General. Sauer represented Trump at the Supreme Court, convincing the conservative majority to give presidents broad immunity from prosecution. Republicans will again control the U.S. House, according to a call by the Associated Press. As NPR's Domenica Montanaro explains, it sets a clear path for President-elect Trump.
Donald Trump will go into office with full control over the levers of power in Washington. He'll be in the White House, and Republicans will have majorities in both the House and Senate. That means Trump will likely have an easier time passing priorities like extending tax cuts and confirming more federal judges. Congress holds the purse strings, so that could help on money for border control efforts. But much of what Trump intends to do to curb illegal immigration, including his promise of a mass deportation, will come from the White House and federal agencies. Domenico Montanaro, NPR News, Washington.
In Israel, the court is rejecting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's request to delay his corruption trial amid war. He'll now testify next month. NPR's Daniel Estrin has more from Tel Aviv.
Netanyahu's lawyers argued he didn't have enough time to prepare his testimony because of the wars with Hamas and Hezbollah. The judges in his case said they gave Netanyahu 5 months to prepare and that the circumstances of the war had not changed significantly to justify a delay. The trial has lasted more than 4 years and concerns his alleged deal-making with media moguls for positive press coverage. In a new development, Israeli authorities are investigating Netanyahu's inner circle. Israeli media report allegations that classified information was leaked about the Gaza war to benefit Netanyahu. Netanyahu denies wrongdoing. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
On Wall Street, the Dow was down 207 points. This is NPR.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Gail DeVotter. The FBI has arrested a 28-year-old accused terrorist sympathizer who's accused of planning an attack in the Houston area. FBI Special Agent Douglas Williams Jr. says Anaya Saeed became radicalized after the Hamas attack on Israel in October of 2023.
Investigators learned Saeed was searching for ways to commit violent acts in the United States, on our soil, and right here in Houston, Texas. He admitted to wanting to use explosives to commit a mass killing here in Houston. He offered his home as a safe sanctuary to ISIS operatives.
Saeed is an American-born citizen whose family moved to Lebanon after he was born. He came back to the U.S. in 2014. City Council has now extended Houston's civility ordinance to Magnolia Park in the East End. News 88.7's Dominic Anthony Walsh tells us a rule is intended to disperse unhoused people by making it illegal to sit, lie, or put personal items on sidewalks.
Councilmember Joaquin Martinez represents the area and supports the new rules. He says Magnolia Park has seen more unhoused people over the last few years, especially after Metro opened the last station on the Green Line in 2017, and Greyhound relocated its bus operations last year.
It's very complex, right? It's not just one variable that can say this is what it was. This is just part of the solution. We're hoping to see some good results, but also know that there's still a lot of work to be done.
Magnolia Park joins 11 other areas in Houston where the ordinance is in effect, including Midtown and Museum Park. I'm Dominic Anthony Walsh, News 88.7.
The leader of a nonprofit group that wants to renovate the Astrodome says it's in the community's best interest to overhaul the old stadium. Astrodome Conservancy Executive Director Beth Wiedauer Jackson told This Morning's Houston Matters the dome is part of Houston's identity. That plan would cost about $1 billion. Tonight, we're expecting clear skies. Overnight low should be around 50. Sunshine tomorrow. High goes up to about 77. I'm Gail DeLauder, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Doris Duke Foundation, which aims to support the well-being of people and the planet for a more creative, equitable, and sustainable future. And listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro in Washington.
And I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California. Republicans on Capitol Hill are now grappling with President-elect Donald Trump's choices to fill his cabinet. Among those choices is Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. He's Trump's pick for Attorney General. Now, Gaetz was under investigation by the House Ethics Committee for allegations of sex trafficking, and he resigned from the House yesterday. But now both Democrats and Republicans in the Senate want to know what that committee found. NPR congressional correspondent Deirdre Walsh joins us now from the Capitol. Hi, Deirdre.
Hey, Elsa.
Okay, so when will we see this House ethics report, you think? I mean, will we?
It's unclear. Once a member resigns from the House, any pending ethics committee investigation ends. The panel was actually planning to meet tomorrow, I'm told by a source familiar, and possibly vote to release their report on Gaetz. They didn't have a chance to act before he resigned his seat. I talked to a former House ethics lawyer, Kendrick Payne, who's with the Campaign Legal Center, and he said the ethics committee absolutely could release the report, but they typically do not after a member leaves. There's no rule to bar the committee from doing that if they wanted to. The top Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee today, Dick Durbin, sent the House Ethics Committee a letter saying they need to hand over immediately their ethics report on Gaetz and all the documentation on their probe. It is worth noting that the Justice Department did investigate Gaetz, declined to bring any charges, and he says he's done nothing wrong.
And just to be clear, Deirdre, Republicans, or at least some of them, are also calling for this report, right?
That's right. Texas Republicans Senator John Cornyn, he's a senior member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He said the committee should use all means necessary to get full records about Gaetz.
I don't think any of us want to fly blind, and because that wouldn't be discharging our responsibilities. But again, part of this is to protect the president against information or surprises coming out later that he and his team weren't aware of.
Okay. I'm going to assume senators will eventually vote on Gaetz' nomination. How important do you think this information is to them before they can vote?
This ethics report is turning out to be a flashpoint in this nomination. But even some of Gaetz' strong supporters say the ethics report is part of the record the Senate should be able to review, along with things like an FBI background check. These are things they do for all nominees. Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville told reporters it's going to be a fine-tooth comb, and Trump's team knew that going in about this nominee. Iowa Republican Senator Joni Ernst told our colleague Elena Moore that Gaetz does face an uphill battle. He's a real Trump loyalist, but he's also made a lot of waves inside the party. He's made some enemies on Capitol Hill. Other Senate Republicans argued Trump won and his nominees deserve to be confirmed. Here's Missouri Senator Josh Hawley.
I am presuming to vote yes on all the president's nominees, those he has put forward, those he hasn't. He's the leader of my party. He just won decisively, and I think he's earned the presumption of support.
Hawley also expects Gaetz and other nominees to go through the regular committee process.
Are there any signs that these concerns could force Trump to consider nominating someone else instead of Gaetz?
I'm not seeing any. Those close to Trump are defending Gaetz, saying he's qualified for the job. Corey Lewandowski, a top Trump campaign official, was on Newsmax today and saying, if this is who Trump wants, they're going to use all the resources at their disposal to make sure he's confirmed. Lewandowski said Gaetz' nomination was not, quote, a head fake. There aren't any signs right now that any Senate Republican leaders are weighing in. Senator John Thune, I talked to, the incoming Senate Majority Leader, and he said questions about the nomination are something to ask the Senate Judiciary Committee about.
That is NPR's Deirdre Walsh. Thank you, Deirdre.
Thanks, Elsa.
Israeli officials say they're getting closer to declaring mission accomplished in southern Lebanon. That mission is to push the Hezbollah militia away from Israel's border so tens of thousands of Israelis can return home to the area safely. NPR's Daniel Estrin brings us this look at a tense borderland that has changed dramatically during the conflict.
I climbed to the top of an Israeli military outpost on the Lebanon border just a few months before the conflict began last year.
This is really surreal. You just see a yellow Hezbollah flag flying right along the Israeli fence surrounding this outpost.
It was June 2023, and Israel said the Hezbollah militia was beefing up its presence on the border. We watched men with binoculars and cameras approach right next to the Israeli outpost. The soldiers said they were Hezbollah.
Okay, now we see more guys coming. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
A few months later, Hamas stormed into southern Israel on October 7th. Then Hezbollah opened fire at northern Israel. And Hezbollah and Israel have been trading fire since. Israelis and Lebanese have fled their homes near the border. Last week, I visited the deserted Israeli village of Shtula on Israel's northern border.
Full of shattered glass and debris on the floor.
A man had been sweeping the floor of this home at the beginning of the conflict when a missile launched from a neighboring hill in Lebanon pierced the walls. Israeli military spokesman David Baruch points out the window toward Lebanon.
They shot right near the antenna over there on the hill. Since then, we've gone in, we've pushed them back.
Israel has had ground troops in southern Lebanon for the last 6 weeks.
You've seen clips of the incredible amounts of ammunition that we've taken out, the incredible amounts of infrastructure that was built, that I think even we might have been surprised by what we're seeing.
We're all about active defense.
We meet David from the local security squad. The men here won't give their last names because they're in a sensitive role patrolling a military zone, making sure no one from Lebanon storms the border. David's house is next to the border. The neighboring hill in Lebanon, once forested, is now bare.
When the troops entered Lebanon, they cleared out that area?
They had to, because Hezbollah was tunneling there and stashing a lot of weapons, and we had to clear that because of that threat and the proximity.
An Israeli TV news report shows what the military has done in a neighboring Lebanese village, Aita Eshab. The TV news anchor embeds with troops, touring the extensive destruction to the village homes, saying nearly every home stored weapons. A soldier hands the journalist a button to press. Says 4, 3, 2, 1. And a home explodes. The news anchor says a home with an ammunition storeroom with a line of sight to Israel has been blown up. One less threat over Israel. In an interview with NPR, the Lebanese mayor of that village, Mohammed Srour, denies weapons were stored there. He says all the homes in the village have been destroyed, but residents are determined to return when the war is over. In a briefing to reporters, an Israeli military official said Israel has destroyed the majority of Hezbollah's drones, a portion of its rockets and missiles, and that Israel is very close to the goal of destroying Hezbollah infrastructure about 2 miles from the Israeli border. Israel is talking to the U.S. about the terms of a ceasefire. Back in Shtula, we hear the distant booms of Hezbollah launching rockets.
We'll go over towards the wall over here for a second.
Hezbollah's firing now.
They fly across the border, over our heads, and we see flashes of light and puffs of smoke in the air as the rockets are intercepted farther south. This is the change since Israel's ground offensive began in southern Lebanon. With Hezbollah mostly pushed back from the border, rockets are fired from farther away, allowing a bit more time to run for cover.
Turn right.
The head of the Shtula security squad, Shlomi, says that's not enough. He says, we have to ensure our residents' 100% safety, not 99%. It appears it will take a lot to convince Israelis to return here, even if there is a ceasefire agreement. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Shtula, on the Israel-Lebanon border.
is intelligent alien life darting around in space and even in the skies above us on Earth? Has the U.S. government been covering up unexplained phenomena? These questions came up at a hearing on Capitol Hill Wednesday, and NPR's Bill Chappell watched it. Here is his report.
The hearing didn't have the fireworks of a similar one last year, when a retired Air Force officer alleged that the U.S. has recovered what he called non-human biologics from crash sites.
Turn left.
But like last year, this hearing by House Oversight subcommittees relied mainly on asking former military and government officials to answer questions that have circulated publicly for decades about UFOs. The government now prefers to call them UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Here's Representative Nancy Mace, who led the hearing, questioning Luis Elizondo, a former Defense Department official.
Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, were they designed to identify and reverse engineer alien craft, yes or no?
Yes.
Do any U.S. contractors have the same?
I would prefer to address that in a closed session, ma'am.
Elizondo said he has signed a document that prevents him from speaking openly about details related to UAPs. That drew this response from Representative Jared Moskowitz.
You specifically said the document said you can't talk about crash retrieval. You know, you can't talk about Fight Club if there's no Fight Club.
Correct.
Repeatedly, the witnesses called for ensuring that people who report or study UAPs aren't stigmatized or intimidated. Both the experts and lawmakers said that the U.S. is intent on learning more about UAPs, whatever they are, and they stressed that presidential administrations and the Pentagon should be more transparent about UAPs. One of the witnesses, journalist Michael Schellenberger, shared what he says is a whistleblower report alleging that the White House secretly controls a UAP research program called Immaculate Constellation. Mace and other lawmakers say the government labels too many records as classified and keeps them secret for too long. And when it comes to UAPs, they say the public has a right to know whether an unusual phenomenon might have been caused by rival nations or by private companies, or perhaps by something else altogether. Bill Chappell, NPR News.
Thank you for listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
It's one thing to love public radio, but it's a special thing to support it. Consider this. If you've got a car you don't need anymore, or you've got one that's simply too expensive to repair, you can arrange to donate it to Houston Public Media. We take any kind of vehicle in any condition. It's easy for you, pickup is free, and it could be worth hundreds of dollars in support. Visit HoustonPublicMedia.org/cars to learn more. And thanks.
Keep right.
Hello, my name is Sean Ramasfuro.
And I'm Noel King.
We make a sometimes funny, sometimes serious daily news show. It's called Today Explained. It's from Vox.
We deliver the context you need to get your head around the news.
All the news, political, art, tech, economy, environment.
And if you don't like it, you get your money back. Just kidding. It's free. It's Today Explained.
That's Today Explained tonight at 7:30 here on News 88.7, your NPR station. Support comes from the Clarion at Brazosport College, presenting vocalist, bandleader, and podcast host Christian Wiggs of Bandstand Presents, in concert on November 22nd at 7:30 p.m. More information at brazosport.edu/Clarion. And Houston Botanic Garden, presenting Radiant Nature, a lantern show featuring illuminated displays and immersive experiences for the winter season. Now open for the holidays at Houston Botanic Garden. Tickets at hbg.org. Tonight's low around 51 degrees, clear skies. Tomorrow you expect the same weather as today, around 77-degree high, and sunny skies, low around 57 tomorrow night, and expect partly sunny skies throughout the weekend before we get a slight chance of showers on Sunday night. It's currently 70 degrees and fair here at the University of Houston. 69 Southwest southbound at Dunleavy has an accident, so does 288 southbound at Holmes Road.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from your part-time controller, the nonprofit accounting specialists, providing financial management services to support stronger nonprofits who make the world a better place. Learn more at yptc.com/NPR. From Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates, all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR. And from the Doris Duke Foundation.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Elsa Chang. President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense, Peter Hegseth, has surprised many lawmakers who say they just don't know much about him. But one thing has gotten a lot of notice, his tattoos. Here he is talking about this on a recent podcast.
I was deemed an extremist because of a tattoo by my National Guard unit in Washington, D.C.
NPR domestic extremism correspondent Odette Youssef joins us now to discuss. Hi, Odette.
Hey, Elsa.
All right, so what are these tattoos? Like, what do they look like and what might they signify here?
So the specific tattoo he said he was dinged for is an image of the Jerusalem cross. So this looks like one large cross with 4 smaller crosses in the corners. It is a symbol of Christianity, and its origins date back to the Crusades. Hegseth also has another tattoo relating to the Crusades of the words Deus Vult, Latin for God wills it. And that was sort of the battle cry to take back the Holy Land and to slaughter Muslims. Now, Hegseth says these are not symbols of white nationalism, that they are symbols of Christianity. And he is very big on this notion of a modern-day American Christian crusade. You know, one of his books is titled American Crusade. But it is important to know that symbols and language tied to the Crusades are very present in some extremist movements. You know, this was a symbol on display on January 6th. It was contained in the writings of neo-Nazi mass shooter who killed scores at a summer camp in Norway in 2011. And it could signal a deep antipathy toward Islam.
Do we have any evidence that Hegseth feels any deep antipathy towards Islam?
So I attempted to contact Hegseth for an interview, and I haven't heard back. But one group that has looked into this is the progressive watchdog group Media Matters for America. Now, they've highlighted his connections to David Horowitz, a prominent American Islamophobe. They've also highlighted passages from Hegseth's own books where he complains about growing numbers and political representation of Muslims in the U.S. And Hegseth has also spoken about rebuilding the so-called Third Temple in Jerusalem, which would involve destroying the third holiest site in Islam.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, what else have you found, Odette? Anything that might shed light on Hegseth's religious beliefs or religious affiliations, anything?
So scholars told me that Hegseth is what they would consider to be a Christian nationalist, you know, and even within the spectrum of Christian nationalism, that he belongs to a movement that one religious scholar, Matthew Taylor, calls, quote, the very militant end of the Christian nationalist spectrum. Now, this is called the Christian Reconstructionist movement, and it seeks to reestablish biblical law, namely Old Testament biblical law. Now, Elsa, this movement has lately been finding more popularity, specifically with young men in the U.S. They're sometimes referred to as Theo Bros, in part because this is considered a very masculine expression of Christianity. Here's Julie Ingersoll of the University of North Florida.
This tradition is deeply patriarchal. Men are in charge, and women exist for the purpose of assisting their men in their exercise of dominion, and their roles are very limited to home and family.
The leader of the denomination that Hegseth belongs to has established a kind of theocracy in Moscow, Idaho, and some within this movement speak quite openly of repealing the 19th Amendment, you know, the right for women to vote. And so, you know, I think this adds some context around what Hegseth has said in interviews about wanting to remove women from combat roles.
That is NPR's Odette Youssef. Thank you so much, Odette.
Thank you.
You can typically find DJs on radio stations and in bars and clubs. And these days, many of us access our own personal DJ on a smartphone. NPR's Chloe Veltman reports on how artificial intelligence is helping companies like Spotify and Pandora tackle how to get users to listen for longer.
Meet X, Spotify's AI DJ.
I'm going to come back every few songs to change up the vibe. But
during a listening session, it plays me familiar songs like this Big Star classic, as well as unfamiliar ones, which the AI DJ introduces with a few words.
With the song from Tall Heights, a duo with Tim Harrington on vocals and guitar, and Paul Wright on vocals and cello. Let's listen.
New Yorker staff writer Kelefa Sanneh is the author of the pop music history book Major Labels. He says he understands why Spotify introduced a DJ.
When you have a voice, even an AI voice, talking to you every few songs, that makes you pay attention. That makes you lean forward.
Why is this even necessary? Can't people just listen to the radio if they want a voice between songs? Sure. But Sanneh says that's not all listeners want.
We want to listen to all the stuff that everyone likes, but also only the stuff that we like. And we want it to be broad and social, but also narrow and personal.
Spotify has been giving users personalized playlists based on individual data for years. The music streamer has millions of listeners, and real human beings couldn't create recommendations for each one of them. But AI can.
This is your personalized DJ just for you.
Ziad Sultan is Spotify's Vice President of Personalization. He says the DJ feature uses generative AI to tell the listener why it is making the selections it is making. Like, for example...
Right now I'm going to hit you with a few songs you couldn't get enough of in 2023.
Sultan says it serves these selections up with the help of an AI personality.
This incredibly realistic but also warm voice that makes people want to follow their recommendations.
Spotify has AI DJs in English and Spanish right now. The talent behind the English version is a company employee, Xavier Jernigan.
It's about storytelling. It's about human connection.
This is the real Xavier Jernigan speaking, not X, his AI DJ persona. He says the DJ intros encourage users to listen to unfamiliar tracks.
We know through our data that when people hear stories about the artists, about the songs, and know the why as to why we recommended that song, they're less likely to skip it.
Joe Inzerillo is the Chief Product and Technology Officer at SiriusXM, which owns Spotify competitor Pandora. He likens Spotify's AI DJ to a sommelier's job at a fancy restaurant.
He doesn't just pop the cork and start pouring. He starts telling you about the wine and where it was grown and like how he met the wine master and all those sorts of things. I think it's sort of the same thing with music that DJs can contextualize.
But Inzerillo says Pandora doesn't have one.
Our goal is to understand the user well enough and understand the music well enough. There aren't those sorts of necessities to have to contextualize it to you.
And Spotify's AI DJ isn't always successful. The New Yorker's Kelefa Sanneh found it distracting at times.
At one point, the AI DJ at Spotify told me, this next block is music that a lot of people seem to think is good for cleaning their house to.
Sanneh says then up came Celine Dion's version of River Deep Mountain High.
And so I'm thinking about Celine. I'm like, do people clean their house to Celine Dion?
Yet some people quite like the Spotify AI DJ, including this human DJ.
It plays like my likes on shuffle based on when I actually listen to this type of music and tempo and genre.
This is DJ Umami, the resident DJ for the San Francisco Giants.
And then they'll like throw in a couple songs that they think that I would like. And I love that.
DJ Umami says the AI DJ is a useful tool, but since it can't do things human DJs do, like catch the vibe of a room or perform intricate mixes, she says she's not worried about it coming for her job. Yet. Chloe Veltman, NPR News.
This is NPR News.
Support comes from Houston Chamber Choir, presenting This Sky, a choral compilation that ponders the heavens, led by Artistic Director-designate Betsy Cook Weber. November 16th at St. Philip Presbyterian Church. More at HoustonChamberChoir.org/radio.
Support comes from Signify Business Cash by Wells Fargo. With this business credit card, cardholders can earn rewards on business purchases with no caps or categories to track. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/signify. Terms apply. Support for Houston Public Media comes from Beeman Strong and Company. Real estate sales, purchases, and leases performed on an hourly basis, like a law firm. Information at 713-552-1110.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from Visit Galveston, featuring over 50 days of holiday events and activities that blend Galveston's history, family traditions, and the island spirit. More information is available at visitgalveston.com.
Marketplace is supported by Solidigm. Companies require a new approach to AI storage. Solidigm offers solid-state storage solutions optimized for AI from core to edge. StorageForAI.com.
Politicians have their plans, but the market doesn't always cooperate. From American Public Media, This is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Drexel University, whose cooperative education program positions students to explore future careers and discover their ideal profession before graduation. This is experiential education. More at drexel.edu. And by VantageScore, a leading inclusive and predictive credit score used by 8 out of 10 largest banks and over 3,400 banks and fintechs nationwide. VantageScore drives financial inclusion by leveraging innovation. More at VantageScore.com. And by the John Templeton Foundation, funding interdisciplinary research and catalyzing conversations to inspire awe and wonder. Learn more at templeton.org.
In Baltimore, I'm Amy Scott, in for Kai Rizdal. It's Thursday, November 14th. Good to have you with us. Now that Republicans have won control of the House, President-elect Donald Trump will have an easier time passing his agenda. One priority we heard a lot during the campaign, drill, baby, drill. Trump promised to cut Americans' energy bills by expanding oil and gas production. Thing is that production is already at record levels during the Biden administration, and today the International Energy Agency projected a global oil surplus of more than 1 million barrels per day next year. Marketplace's Henry Ebb looks at how that might complicate Trump's plans.
The basic story of oil this year is that the growth in demand for crude keeps falling short of expectations, says Mark Finley at Rice University.
And so it looks like global oil demand is pretty sluggish. It's still growing, but not very aggressively.
One of the main reasons for that is weakening demand from China,
which is both a function of the rapid growth of electric cars, but also the overall weakness of their economy.
China's been going through some tough economic times, as you might have heard, and a weaker economy needs less oil. At the same time, the country is rapidly switching to EVs, which cuts into the market for gasoline. And with that softer demand, OPEC, the cartel of oil-producing countries in the Middle East and elsewhere, has been holding back oil production to try to keep prices high. But Matt Smith, an analyst at Kepler, says,
at the same time, you've seen oil coming to the market from the likes of Guyana, from Brazil, from the US, from Canada, from Norway.
Essentially making up for any supply gap left by OPEC, Smith says. So with weak demand and ample supply, you get lower prices. Brent crude right now is trading around $70 a barrel.
This creates challenges, financial challenges for the oil industry that really depends on high prices in order to make big profits.
Clark Williams Derry is an analyst with the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. Lower prices mean oil companies aren't as eager to spend money to drill. So he says, while many oil producers will welcome the Trump administration's likely efforts to cut some regulations and open more public land to drilling,
if the conditions aren't there for oil companies to make money, they're not going to be doing what a politician tells them to do. They're going to be doing what's profitable.
Of course, he says oil markets are susceptible to global conflicts and other factors which can push prices up and make companies more eager to boost production. I'm Henry App for Marketplace.
Disney had some good news for its investors today. The media giant reported better than expected fourth quarter earnings and said its streaming services posted $321 million in operating income. A pretty big deal considering just 2 years ago they were losing more than $4 billion. The company also added more than 4 million new Disney Plus subscribers. Marketplace's Kaylee Wells has more on the apparent turnaround.
The primary driver of Disney's success is pretty straightforward.
They've had a great quarter streaming because people want to subscribe.
Independent media consultant Brad Adgate says Disney's got great content.
The Bear and Shogun, they won Emmy Awards for Best Drama and Best Comedy.
Disney's also got ESPN, which satisfies sports fans, and it's the big brand for kids who want to watch The Little Mermaid again and again. The company's also found success in its cheaper subscription with ads, says Michael Smith. He's a professor at Carnegie Mellon University.
Adding the advertising tier has brought in more customers than it cannibalized customers from the full paid tier.
Smith says Disney also got rid of the old structure with a movie division and a TV division and an international team.
Bob Iger blew up that traditional organizational structure and made his work structure look much more like Netflix, where he's got a division that's focused on content and he's got a division that's focused on platform.
Disney's success is not that unique. Brandon Katz is a senior entertainment industry strategist with Parrot Analytics.
All companies right now are getting better from a monetary perspective in terms of streaming and narrowing losses to turn a profit.
Thanks to growing advertising and increasing subscription prices. Plus, there's the whole thing where it's harder to share passwords now.
Proving that Netflix is not the only one that can get you off that freeloading ability.
Kat says that success won't last for everyone. Out of the main 8 streaming services, he says general consensus is roughly half will still be here in a decade. I'm Kaylee Wells for Marketplace.
After some sticky inflation data this week, the Fed is taking a cautious approach to further interest rate cuts. In a speech in Dallas today, Fed Chair Jay Powell said the economy is not sending any signals that we need to be in a hurry. Wall Street had a down day. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. This week on the state of retirement in this country. A report from the Employee Benefit Research Institute found that nearly a third of retirees feel like they're spending more than they can afford. That's almost double the percentage who said that in 2020. Marketplace's Samantha Fields has more.
The last 4 years have been a bit of a roller coaster.
We had a huge pandemic. It was traumatic for so many people and their jobs and the economy.
Mark Avery at the Brookings Institution says the economy has bounced back well.
But many people are still hurting.
Especially many older adults who retired earlier than they planned, says Bridget Bearden at the Employee Benefit Research Institute.
Many of the retirees that we spoke to experienced a decline in their standard of living.
Inflation is part of the reason. Teresa Ghilarducci at the New School says the biggest increases were on things that retirees spend most of their money on.
In food, in shelter, or in medical care.
People are also carrying a lot more debt. 2 years ago, 40% of retirees had outstanding credit card debt. Today, 70%.
And we're finding more and more retirees with larger and larger mortgages. And we also see a significant number of retirees who are still carrying student debt.
Some of these factors are new or getting worse. But Alicia Manel at the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College says the basic reality has been true for years.
That somewhere between 40% and 50% of people who are entering retirement are not going to have the kind of money that will let them spend the way they spent before.
Straight on. One of the biggest issues is that nearly half of people never work a job that offers a retirement plan, and others only do for part of their career. Manel says that needs to change.
Continuous coverage is really the most important thing that we can do to improve the whole retirement situation.
That and fix Social Security before it runs out of funds. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
Imagine for a moment you're involved in running a business that's been the target of an investigation by the Biden administration, or even a lawsuit. You're probably weighing 2 options right now. Try to reach some kind of settlement with the outgoing administration, or sit back and wait for what might be a better deal from the Trump administration after Inauguration Day. Marketplace's Kimberly Adams has been looking at that very real scenario.
Earlier this year, the Biden administration sued Live Nation, the entertainment company that runs Ticketmaster along with concert venues, accusing it of antitrust violations, harming fans and performers by monopolizing the live music industry. But on Monday, during the company's earnings call, President and CFO Joe Berchtold had a cautiously optimistic outlook on life under the incoming Trump administration.
We are hopeful that we'll see a return to the more traditional antitrust approach,
as opposed to the more aggressive approach of the Biden administration's lawsuit.
some parts of the case we think reflect a much more interventionist philosophy today than you'd expect of a Republican administration. Obviously, the request to break up Live Nation and Ticketmaster would be an example of that.
So we can expect some companies to try to slow down the progress on some of these cases during the transition, says John Coffey, a professor at Columbia Law and an expert on corporate governance.
They don't know, but they are hoping that the incoming administrator of a given agency will be dramatically opposed to the positions of the predecessor administrator.
Coffey says companies may choose to hold off on a settlement or slow down legal proceedings to wait for more favorable conditions.
This is particularly true at the SEC and the FTC, where they've had positions that Trump has publicly criticized.
Now, not everything at the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Trade Commission will grind to a halt.
Things like insider trading, accounting fraud, when people pay bribes to, foreign officials, those types of cases are going to continue.
Jaime Marlier is a partner at Morrison Forrester in New York and spent years in the SEC's enforcement division.
Where I think we might see some changes would be in more topical areas.
The cryptocurrency industry, for instance, has an incentive to wait things out, given what the president-elect has said. So do companies in fights over corporate disclosures around environmental, social, and governance issues, ESG. But whether or not waiting will pay off will depend on who President-elect Trump chooses to run these agencies and how far he gets with efforts to turn career civil servants into political appointees. Jennifer Saline teaches law at Arizona State University.
Many of those positions will end up being attorneys, and those attorneys are the ones who often are the ones that are negotiating with corporations and companies that regularly interact with the federal government.
And even if the pressure to toe the line isn't explicit, Celine says those attorneys,
in the back of their minds, they'll also be thinking, well, I'm going to have to really come down hard on what the Trump administration wants.
Because if they don't, they might find themselves looking for a new job. In Washington, I'm Kimberly Adams for Marketplace.
Coming up, I've heard from a lot of people that they feel kind of like they're moving through their day in a fog. And who could blame them? But first, let's do the numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 207 points, 0.5% to close at 43,750. The Nasdaq fell 123 points, 0.6% to land at 19,107, and the S&P 500 shed 36 points, 0.6% to finish at 59.49. Henry Epp was telling us about global oil supply and demand and their possible impact on oil prices. Taking a look at some firms in the petroleum industry, ExxonMobil rose less than 10%, Valero gained 0.3%, Occidental soured 0.9%, Chevron grew 1.9%. Advance Auto Parts added 0.6% and announced plans to close more than 500 corporate stores and 200 independent locations as part of a wider restructuring. Bond prices fell. The yield on the 10-year T-note rose to 4.45%. You're listening to Marketplace.
The Numbers is supported by Odoo.com, your entire business on one platform. Marketplace is supported by Zealous. Zealous helps healthcare payers and providers nationwide to modernize the financial experience so care can flow through the system. Zealous, the financial platform designed to remove friction. Let care flow with Zealous. And by Palo Alto Networks. Palo Alto Networks delivers comprehensive cybersecurity protection while automating cyber defense to stop threats so organizations can thrive. Learn more at paloaltonetworks.com. And by Progressive Insurance. The Name Your Price tool provides a range of coverage options. Progressive.com. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Professor of Maternal Fetal Medicine at UTMB. I'm passionate about serving mothers
mothers and children all across our region. As both an educator and physician, I'm privileged to shape the next generation of healthcare professionals. I also support Houston Public Media's mission to educate, inform, and provide critical communications infrastructure for first responders. Join me in ensuring their continued impact by visiting houstonpublicmedia.org/donate.
Support comes from HealthLink Advisors, preparing hospitals for cyber attacks and resulting downtime, with clinical-led business community continuity services designed to ensure continuous patient care and operations. More at healthlinkadvisors.com. And John Moore, helping with plumbing, electrical, and air conditioning repairs, including out-of-warranty units since 1965. Details at 730-2525 or at johnmooreservices.com. This is News 88.7, your NPR station.
This is Marketplace. I'm Amy Scott. There's an important part of the U.S. banking ecosystem it's possible you've never heard of. It's the Federal Home Loan Bank System. 11 regional banks that operate throughout the country, providing low-cost loans to banks, credit unions, and other lenders. The Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, as the name implies, is based in San Francisco, but has more than 300 members throughout California, Nevada, and Arizona. Elena McCargo recently took over as president and CEO of the San Francisco Bank. Before that, she was the president of Ginnie Mae. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Amy.
All right, so let's start with a quick explanation for people who aren't familiar with the Federal Home Loan Banks, which I think is probably many of our listeners. So what do you do?
So first of all, it's great to be with you. And the Federal Home Loan Bank System, you are absolutely right, is pretty much an unknown system that has been in the background of our financial services system for 92 years. The Federal Home Loan Banks are really here to provide sources of funding and liquidity to our members to really support economic development, affordable housing. I think that's the system perspective. And so, understanding that the Federal Home Loan Banks, one, are not federal agencies. We're member-owned cooperatives, which is a really interesting structure, and this is why a lot of people have a hard time understanding what we are and how we are. But our members,
yeah, well, the word federal is right in there, so it implies a certain relationship.
Yeah, federally regulated, chartered by Congress. We don't make home loans, and so that's part of our name. And we're not a direct retail bank to consumers. We are a bank of bankers and financial institutions. It's a growing role, and I think going forward will continue to be the case.
So it seems like a rebranding is in order. Federal Home Loan Bank. None of those are really what you do. So that's a question for another time, I guess.
Exactly. We'll talk about that one later. I just wanted to mention, too, just in San Francisco alone, most of our footprint, believe it or not, is smaller local lenders. So we're a real daily part of our financial institutions' ability to provide their products and services and really support grant making, affordable housing, and economic development in their communities.
Yeah, and your mission, housing affordability, is one of the reasons we wanted to have you on, because this crisis has been especially acute in your region, California, Nevada, and Arizona. So as you've taken on this new role, what challenges are you seeing in making and closing that affordability gap?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, affordability has been a long time challenge. Our state, the state of California alone, needs to build 1.2 million affordable homes to meet the demand of low-income renters in our state. Arizona, it's over 175,000 units short. Nevada, nearly 100,000 units. So overall, sort of shortage of housing, and then the implications of homes that are in disaster-prone areas are on the rise. And so when that convergence happens, you can understand if you have a significant shortage, all prices are going to do is rise. And it's making it very, very difficult for affordable housing developers in our states to even bring new construction and new affordable housing online. And I think that's a real significant challenge.
I want to ask you about some criticism of the Federal Home Loan Bank System, which is, that some argue the banks have really strayed from their mission to support affordable housing and community development. As I'm sure you know, this summer, a group of mostly Democratic senators sent letters to each of the 11 banks share of bank members had not originated a single mortgage in 5 years. First, I know you're new to the system, but I want to know how you respond to that, and do you think the system needs reform?
So I think the system has changed and the needs across the country have changed. And I think the system has done a really good job of listening to stakeholders of all kinds, including members of Congress. I think that there has been increased commitments, increased investments nationally in the affordable housing side of our mission. I do think what we do with our affordable housing advisory councils, what we're doing to really increase our investments, the new programs that we've put in place, that's really meaningful, and we are already seeing meaningful change, and we'll continue to see that going forward.
So going back to what we talked about at the beginning, that many people aren't familiar with the Federal Home Loan Bank system. I read a line from the Brookings Institution that said the system has basically been toiling in obscurity. So why should a regular person know about and care about your institution?
I would say that the reason to know that your banker has a bank that is helping to support their ability to do whatever it is they're doing, whether it's to bank you, to lend to you, to provide you with a mortgage loan, those are enabled by your bank's relationship with the Federal Home Loan Bank system. I would go as far as saying, without the Federal Home Loan Bank system, we would probably not have as many community banks and credit unions and smaller financial institutions that could, maintain themselves and continue to sustain. It's not obscure. It's not, and it's not small. It's very consequential that the Federal Home Loan Banks are there to provide that needed liquidity and ensure that we have the financial stability we need and that community banks and others can thrive.
All right, Elena McCargo is president and CEO of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Show yesterday, we heard from a tea producer in Asheville, North Carolina, who's figuring out how to rebuild in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Lots of businesses in Asheville are trying to do the same. It's a mountain community of about 95,000 people, and tourism is a big part of the economy. It brings in nearly $3 billion per year. But when flooding destroyed huge parts of Asheville, including its water system, tourism ground to a halt. Laura Hackett from Blue Ridge Public Radio looks at how locals are navigating when and how to invite tourists back.
Asheville is a mountain community and can be an expensive place to live. So like a lot of residents, Renee Bouchard has a couple jobs. One teaching yoga, the other cleaning short-term rentals. When Hurricane Helene hit, both jobs were affected.
My yoga studio that I was teaching at completely flooded.
So now she's relying on her cleaning job for income. But most visitors have canceled fall bookings, meaning much of Bouchard's income dried up. She used to clean 1 or 2 houses every day and get around $900 a week. Now she's lucky if she gets a third of that.
I've just today, showed up to a property and it wasn't used, so the guests didn't come, and it's just like that's me losing money that I thought I was going to get.
Still, Bouchard says she gets why visitors are avoiding Asheville right now.
The water's probably going to be some sort of yellow to sweet tea color. It's not going to be clear when you wash your hands. It's going to smell like chlorine and chemicals.
There's no timeline for when clean drinking water will return. The reservoir is still a muddy mess. And in town, it still feels like a disaster zone. The restaurants that are open are serving reduced menus on paper plates. And residents are still visiting aid sites for basic necessities like drinking water, clean showers, and laundry.
We're left with all this wreckage and trying to navigate how to rebuild or whether to rebuild or relocate.
That's Kayla Clark, a comedian and mental health professional. She's been holding weekly support groups for Asheville residents to grieve and process.
I've heard from a lot of people that they feel kind of like they're moving through their day in a fog.
And in this mental state, it's hard to welcome and serve tourists.
There are people that come in and they say, whoa, there was a storm here, which is really jarring because it feels like, it was just so intense and huge for all of us.
But what's also tough right now is paying basic bills. On a Saturday morning, Jeffrey Burrows sits in his tiny jewelry shop in Asheville's River Arts District with an iced coffee. Luckily, his business didn't get flooded during Helene.
We're on the higher side of the tracks, further from the river, and there's only about, currently 20% of the district remaining, but it's open.
Pre-Helene, his store and the whole neighborhood would be filled with shoppers.
This is a Saturday. There would be so many people out here walking around, and it's just leaves on the ground.
And normally, he would sell at least a few custom bracelets. But so far today, 0 sales. Burrows says he's still processing the disaster himself, and it feels awkward to reopen the shop.
Well, I have to open. I don't know for whom, but I have to open because now I've got to pay rent.
And he says Asheville needs visitors right now.
Regardless of how I feel about tourism, the reality is our city is built and defined by the income we generate from tourism. That's our current situation.
He understands that residents are torn, but they do agree on one thing. If tourists do come, they should bring patience, plenty of drinking water, and plan to spend some money. In Asheville, I'm Laura Hackett for Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by the John Templeton Foundation, funding interdisciplinary research and catalyzing conversations to inspire awe and wonder. Dive deeply into the wonders of the universe at templeton.org. And by Babbel for Business. Babbel's professional language learning platform offers practical and industry-specific language courses designed for faster, better learning and a more culturally inclusive workforce. Learn more at babbelforbusiness.com.
This final note on the way out today, in news that sounds like something you'd read in The Onion, the winner in a bankruptcy auction for Alex Jones's InfoWars media company was The Onion. Jones, a far-right conspiracy theorist, was forced to surrender InfoWars and related assets after a $1 billion judgment against him for promoting lies about the Sandy Hook school massacre. With backing from some Sandy Hook families, The Onion has plans to relaunch the platform in January as a parody site with ads and other content from the nonprofit Every Town for Gun Safety. John Buckley, John Gordon, Noya Carr, Diantha Parker, Amanda Peacher, and Stephanie Seek are the Marketplace editing staff. Amir Bibawi is the managing editor. And I'm Amy Scott. We'll be back tomorrow. This is APM. Tonight on Houston Public Media, TV8, a night of mystery and intrigue with the Sister Boniface Mysteries at 7, followed by Death in Paradise at 8, and Agatha Christie's Poirot at 9. Tonight on Houston Public Media, TV8.
Support comes from Nuestra Palabra, presenting author Dagoberto Glib, originally banned in Arizona, his 2 new books Tuesday, November 19th, 6 p.m. at TBH 333 South Jensen. More at HoustonReads.org. This is News 88.7. I'm Brenda Valdivia. Tonight's low around 50 degrees with clear skies. And if you enjoyed today's weather, you'll see it back again tomorrow. High around 77 degrees, sunny skies. Throughout the weekend, partly sunny to mostly cloudy on Sunday before we get to a slight chance of showers, increasing to likely chance of rain on Monday. It's currently 70 degrees and fair here at the University of Houston. I-10 Katy Freeway westbound in Washington Avenue has an accident that's affected the right shoulder, but traffic is slowing down in that area. This is your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston. The daily is coming up. It's now 7 o'clock.
Donald Trump generally views the world sort of in walking casino terms, which is heads he wins and tails you lose. And so if Joe Biden is is adhering to norms because Joe Biden believes in those norms. And if they don't work for Trump, then he's going to buck against them. And as we have seen, our country discovered after the 2016 election how much of our system is based on norms and not laws. And that is going to be shown again in the coming months.
I'm Michael Barbaro. That's coming up on The Daily from the New York Times.
The Daily is supported by Total Wine & More, where shoppers can find a great Cabernet, bourbon, or sparkling wine for everyone on their holiday list. Total Wine & More helps shoppers find what they love and love what they find. Drink responsibly. Be 21. And by Progressive Insurance with Snapshot. Learn more about Snapshot at Progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Snapshot not available in California or from all agents.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. Donald Trump has not had many defenders in Congress, but he is rewarding one of his most stalwart. Trump picking former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz as his nominee for Attorney General. We're getting the nomination to proving more of an uphill battle, as we hear from NPR's Deirdre Walsh.
Those close to Trump are defending Gaetz, saying he's qualified for the job. Corey Lewandowski, a top Trump campaign official, was on Newsmax today and saying, if this is who Trump wants, they're going to use all the resources at their disposal to make sure he's confirmed. Lewandowski said Gaetz's nomination was not, quote, a head fake. There aren't any signs right now that any Senate Republican leaders are weighing in. Senator John Thune, I talked to, the incoming Senate Majority Leader, and he said questions about the nomination are something to ask the Senate Judiciary Committee about.
Gaetz resigned his House seat yesterday, sidestepping a House Ethics Committee probe into sex trafficking allegations. Trump, meanwhile, also today announced he's chosen personal lawyer Todd Blanche as assistant AG. Trump has also picked a former Congressman Doug Collins to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs. NPR's Quill Lawrence reports Collins served in Iraq and as an Air Force chaplain.
Former Georgia Republican Congressman Doug Collins left office in 2021 after an unsuccessful run for Senate. Since then, he's worked as a lawyer for Trump and supported his re-election campaign. He still serves in the Air Force Reserves. The nomination surprised many close watchers of the department because Collins has not worked prominently on veterans issues in the past. VA is the second largest government department after the Pentagon, and have confirmed Collins will oversee hundreds of thousands of staff and hundreds of billions of dollars spent on veterans' care and benefits. Announcing his nomination, Trump said Collins would be a great advocate for our active duty service members, veterans, and military families to ensure they have the support they need. Quill Lawrence, NPR News.
New York's governor is moving ahead with a plan to charge drivers a fee to enter the busiest parts of Manhattan. Kathy Hochul paused the congestion pricing program in June, just before it was set to launch. Stephen Nesson of member station WNYC in New York reports it's coming back.
Governor Hochul paused the original plan, saying with inflation and the high cost of living, a $15 daily toll was too high. Now, she wants to relaunch it and charge vehicles that drive in Manhattan, south of 60th Street, $9 a day.
Of course I understand how hard this is, but this is the law of the state of New York. I'm obligated to follow New York law. And I worked hard to find a creative solution to relieve the burden on these same individuals who are struggling.
President-elect Donald Trump has promised to kill the tolls once in office. In a statement, he said,
This programming is sponsored by Bistro Manil, offering European-inspired American fare paired with craft beer or select wines. Now accepting bookings for private holiday parties through December 15. Reservations at bistromanil.com.
Chemical magnate J. Peter Grace to lead a bureaucratic cost-cutting commission in 1982. However, Grace also had fewer conflicts of interest than Musk. For one, Musk has billions of dollars in contracts with NASA. His Tesla electric car company also benefits from government tax incentives and is subject to federal safety regulations. While social media platform X and AI operations also intersect with government in other ways. A Texas grand jury has indicted a construction supervisor and his employer in the 2021 death of a 24-year-old man working in a trench that collapsed on him. NPR's Robert Benincasa has more.
Juan Jose Galvan Battaglia was completely buried in soil and debris when he was working in a trench in Travis County installing a sewer line. Project Superintendent Carlos Alejandro Guerrero and his employer were charged with criminally negligent homicide. County District Attorney Jose Garza cited NPR's investigation earlier this year, which found that 250 workers died in largely preventable trench collapses from 2013 to 2023, and that only 11 employers had been prosecuted. Garza noted that none of those prosecutions took place in Texas, and that it was time to hold employers accountable. An attorney representing the project superintendent says the worker's death was a tragedy, but it was also an accident. Robert Benincasa, NPR News.
Crude futures prices closed higher. Oil up 27 cents a barrel to $68.70 a barrel in New York. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Insperity, providing HR services and technology, from payroll, benefits, and HR compliance to talent development. Learn more at Insperity.com/HR Matters. And the Doris Duke Foundation.
From New York Times, I'm Michael Barbaro. This is The Daily.
Go straight on.
Today, in his first week as president-elect,
the appointments are coming pretty fast and pretty furious.
Donald Trump moved at breakneck speed to fill out his cabinet with a set of loyalists who were both conventional.
Now, Florida Senator Marco Rubio to be his Secretary of State.
And deeply unconventional.
Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. Well, that'll knock you right off your feet.
The United States Senate chose a leader who could complicate Trump's agenda.
We have a new leader in the United States Senate. It is John Thune, the Republican from South Dakota. He won.
And President Biden welcomed Trump back to the White House. I gathered three of my colleagues to make sense of it all. Julie Davis, Peter Baker, and Maggie Haber. It's Thursday, November 14th. Friends, welcome to the first post-election Daily Roundtable, which we are taping at around 2:45 p.m. on Wednesday. We always disclose that in case something happens during or after our taping that's significant that we don't cover here. There's so much news happening that we did this very last minute, which explains why none of us are in the same room, which is the idea of a roundtable. And you're all spread out across, I believe, the city of Washington, D.C. in different tiny rooms with phones held up to your face. Maggie, Julie, Peter, thank you for making time for us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I think we have to start with the blizzard of appointments that President-elect Trump has made over the past few days, seemingly an appointment every hour. And what's the rush, Peter?
Well, clearly he doesn't want to sit on his laurels here. He's eager to get going. He knows what he's doing this time in a way he didn't know 8 years ago, right? He's thought a lot about who around him he trusts. Last time he had to be introduced to a lot of Republicans he didn't know, and then think about how they fit into a government which he had never served in. So he has the advantage, in effect, of doing this from scratch in a way that, frankly, no second-term president's ever done.
All right, well, we can't cover all these appointments. There are simply too many of them. So I want to begin with two people whose portfolio will be heavily focused on immigration. Stephen Miller and Tom Homan. Julie, you know a lot about Stephen Miller because you covered immigration heavily during the first Trump presidency.
Right, and Stephen Miller was really sort of the architect of a lot of the immigration policies and really the whole sort of language and vision for immigration that Trump brought, not only during the campaign, but in the very beginning of his first term of his presidency, when, Miller led a very sort of aggressive, all-encompassing effort to try to get a bunch of executive orders and a bunch of policy on the track before Trump came into office. We all remember the Muslim ban. There were executive orders that had to do with sanctuary cities and cracking down in various ways. And what we saw at the beginning of his first term was he ran into a lot of obstacles, and he's learned a lot of lessons about how government works and how you would go about implementing those things.
Yeah, I mean, again, what they can do, first of all, is click back on a lot of the things that Joe Biden clicked off, right? The Muslim ban that Julie just referenced was such a disaster the first time around because they had no clue what they were doing. Lawyers were talking to each other, but they weren't talking to the Justice Department, which normally vets these kinds of things. They have a better sense of how to do it this time. But we'll see. Obviously, chaos does tend to follow Trump wherever he goes. But they have the advantage of that 4 years experience.
Now let's talk about Tom Homan. And I think the best way to introduce our listeners to him, he's going to be Trump's border czar.
I wake up every day pissed off because this administration destroyed a more secure border in a lifetime, and I'm sick and tired of hearing about the family separation. I know I'm still being sued over that, so come and get me. I don't give a right? Bottom line is, we enforce the law.
Maggie, what do we make of this kind of rhetoric?
Julie's point about Stephen Miller's role, I think, is the right one, Michael. He is running all of this. He will work very closely with Tom Homan. Homan is a hardliner. He is very clear about this. He was very pro-family separation as a policy. He pushed it for years before Donald Trump was in office, and then once he was in office, saw it as a very effective deterrent. But Homan is moving very quickly. He talked about this on Fox News earlier this week, that they are going to go after sanctuary cities to try to have an impact there, such as New York, which has faced a big influx of migrants, right, which Mayor Eric Adams has been very vocal about, and much more on the side of Donald Trump than President Biden.
Right. Surprisingly so for a Democrat.
Correct. And they believe that they are going in with a majority of people voting for this vision that Trump has articulated, and Homan is going to talk about that and try to implement it as aggressively as possible.
But I also think it's really important to point out that a lot of this is about messaging. And Homan is a former cop. He is a person who likes to talk about enforcement and getting tough. And I think one of the reasons you're seeing Trump name him and Miller early on is because he wants to send the message that this is going to be a different approach. This is going to be aggressive and a crackdown, and they want to lean really far into that because the implementation is probably going to be very difficult, and there are probably going to be a lot of obstacles they run into. But Trump is very focused on sending this message right off the bat that this is what he's doing, and he's not shy about it.
Okay. One of the next appointments I want to focus on really caught a lot of people off guard, and that was Trump's choice to lead the Department of Defense. This one, Maggie, you wrote in the pages of the Times, was quite outside the norm.
So Pete Hegseth, the expected nominee for Secretary of Defense, is a Donald Trump favorite. He is a Fox and Friends figure. He is a Fox News personality. He is also somebody who has served in war, and that is part of his appeal to Trump. It's worth noting two things about Pete Hegseth. Hegseth is most notable for advocating on behalf of Eddie Gallagher, a Navy SEAL, who was accused of war crimes and was convicted of posing with the corpse of a suspected ISIS fighter. And Gallagher, in Pete Hegseth's argument, should not lose any military status.
Right. Trump ultimately intervened on Gallagher's behalf, despite what the military saw as Gallagher's abhorrent conduct.
Correct. And Trump's intervention was very upsetting to military leadership.
But Peter, in choosing a Fox News personality who's outside the military and who was never in those highly senior ranks of the military in his career, I think we have to assume Trump is deliberately disrupting that model, bucking it consciously and saying something. What is he saying exactly?
Yeah, most Secretaries of Defense actually have been civilians, but clearly, as Maggie says, it goes to Trump's fixation on television personalities. He likes people who defend him on television. But it's really important because you've also heard the former president, the president-elect, talk during the campaign about using the military in ways that traditionally the military has not been used before, which is to say, as more of a political tool, right? He wanted to send the military into the streets during the George Floyd protests to stop violent riots, and his military leadership and civilian defense leadership at the time resisted and said, no, that's not appropriate. He doesn't want those kind of people around next time. Remember, in the days after the 2020 election, he had Michael Flynn in the Oval Office saying, maybe think about some version of martial law in which you send the military to seize election machines and rerun elections in states you lost until you win. In picking Pete Hegseth, I think the worry for a lot of people is he's picking somebody who's pliant and will do things that traditionally have been way outside the boundaries of a nonpartisan, apolitical military.
Maggie, is Hegseth a yes man who happens to oversee 2 million soldiers?
I think that Donald Trump is absolutely picking Hegseth, along with most of the people that he is picking for defense or national security roles, on the assumption and belief that Hegseth is going to do what he wants and that Hegseth's views align with his. Does that mean that he is going to align with Trump's priorities vis-a-vis troops, U.S. troops in Europe? Or is this going to be about using the military for domestic law enforcement purposes?
Okay. Is this appointment going to be the one that a United States Senate might look askance at and say, this is a bridge too far?
I think it's notable that people haven't been putting out statements saying this is a great pick. If there's one person who's been announced so far who could be a problem, it's certainly him.
To wrap up the conversation about Trump's appointments, I want to talk about his foreign policy appointments. We understand Trump might make Senator Marco Rubio his Secretary of State, but that's not official.
It has become official since we started this conversation.
Get out of here.
Get out of town. It's the truth.
Breaking literally since we started this conversation?
Two things have happened since we started this conversation. Marco Rubio...
Have you been multitasking?
I never. Marco Rubio became official, and Tulsi Gabbard, the former Democratic Congresswoman, was named for the office of Director of National Intelligence.
This is the sound of me tossing out a digital script.
Right.
So let's talk about Rubio. I thought that we couldn't talk about Rubio because he wasn't official. If he's official, let's talk about the fact that Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, a once forceful opponent of Donald Trump who has turned himself into an ally, might be the leading diplomat in a second Trump presidency. He's somebody who has spoken out forcefully in favor of American military aid to Ukraine. If he becomes Donald Trump's Secretary of State, those will not be his positions. He will have to contort them significantly to Trump, or will he not?
Yeah, he has over the last 8 years adjusted his positions on foreign policy to move away from the sort of more neoconservative or John McCain part of the Republican Party to the Trump part. And he voted against Ukraine aid last time around. He has in fact expressed more support for the idea of an America First look at things. Now, he's a hardline voice on, like, say, Iran, which is in keeping with President-elect Trump, and on China, which, again, I think is at least in keeping with a lot of people around President-elect Trump. But he also passes for what, he is what passes these days for establishment Republican inside this cabinet.
Okay, final question on these appointments before we go to break. What unites all of them in your minds?
Well, fidelity to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think loyalty. That's it.
Especially if you compare it to the 2017 cabinet, right? That the original cabinet he put in included a lot of people he didn't know, a lot of people who were going into government not necessarily because they thought Trump was great, but because they were actually hoping to protect, the United States, the government, policy, what have you, from the Trump president that they didn't necessarily trust. You're not seeing that this time.
Okay, we'll be right back.
The Daily is supported by Baird. Baird strives to attract and retain top financial professionals, providing stability and continuity of advice for clients across market environments. More information at BairdDifference.com. Rigorous reporting told through a human lens. Go deeper into the most important stories of the day with The Daily, an audio series from the New York Times. Distribution of The Daily is made possible by American Public Media. APM produces and distributes programs that inform and inspire, entertain, and engage audiences everywhere.
This is News 88.7.
I'm Natalie Weber. I wanted to become a journalist because I really enjoy informing the community and letting them know about what's happening in local politics, in their school boards, and telling interesting stories. Fort Bend County is a really interesting place to cover because it's the second largest county in the Houston area, and it's a really diverse area. It's also growing super rapidly, and it's expected to reach 1.1 million residents by 2030, and I think that makes it a really interesting place to cover.
Support comes from Blake Hillegeist Real Estate, independent commercial and residential real estate broker with over 30 years experience guiding clients through economic downturns, realty challenges, and everyday life situations. More at BlakeSellsHouston.com.
Support comes from Senior Health Services, helping Houston area seniors who are concerned about changes in their Medicare plan by providing a variety of options, including Medicare supplements, Medicare Advantage, and Part D drug plans. More at SeniorHealthServices.com.
In his first week as president-elect, Donald Trump moved at breakneck speed to fill out his cabinet with a set of loyalists who were both conventional and deeply unconventional. I gathered three of my colleagues to make sense of it all: Julie Davis, Peter Baker, and Maggie Haber. Now we're back. I want to turn Maggie, Peter, Julie, to what we expect Trump's relationship to be like with a Republican-controlled Congress. Up on the Hill today, Just a few hours ago, Trump threw his weight behind the current House Speaker, Mike Johnson, the very conservative Republican Mike Johnson, to be reelected Speaker. But the real battle was over in the Senate, where there was a fight over who would lead that chamber and how loyal they would be to Trump, which of course will have a huge bearing on his ability to get things done in that chamber.
So Senator John Thune, South Dakota, won that race to succeed Mitch McConnell, who has been the longest-serving Senate leader of either party, and that was the first time the Republicans had chosen a new leader in 17 years. So big moment for them. He is an establishment Republican. He has clashed with Trump in the past. Trump was very angry that he did not support the effort in 2021 to overturn the 2020 election results, and Trump did not appreciate that. But the really important thing to keep in mind about this election is that it was by secret ballot. So if we think that this is
people were allowed to oppose the MAGA candidate
because it was a closed-door meeting in the old Senate chamber by secret ballot, the old-fashioned way, you could go up against the MAGA candidate and vote against him without repercussion. So while it's notable and I think important to understand that this is who we have in the Senate Republican Conference, a bunch of people who would rather have the more experienced, seasoned establishment guy at the helm, it's also important not to overread it, because this is not going to be a group of Republicans who are going to be in the mood to put their thumbs in Trump's eye when it comes to public questions of policy or personnel.
I think Julie's right about this. I mean, these guys are willing to be courageous when their names aren't public about it, right? And they're not necessarily going to be standing up to him when it will be known. Now, it does suggest that 3/4 of that Senate Republican caucus is not naturally aligned with Trump on all things, right? You know, unlike the House Republicans, which have become increasingly Trumpy, the Senate Republicans have always been more independent. And mind you, a lot of these people won't be running again until after Trump is out of office. But the real question is, do they protect their prerogatives as the Senate? As Trump talks about having recess appointments, that's the kind of thing a Senate normally, regardless of party, wouldn't stand up for, because they are a co-equal branch of government.
Can you just explain that? And Julie, I want you to weigh in on this. Trump has asked the Senate for what Peter just described as recess appointments. Those are basically appointments that would occur outside of the normal Senate being in session. Basically, it's asking the Senate to abdicate its role in the Constitution as the place that confirms presidential nominations. And John Thune, the new Republican majority leader, was asked about recess appointments, and he said he was open to them, which suggests that he's bending to the president's will pretty much within the first hour of his time as majority leader.
Well, he said that also in the days before the election. All three candidates very quickly, in using various words, essentially said, listen, we're going to get his people confirmed as quickly as possible. And if it does come to a situation where there are a bunch of nominees that can't get confirmed, and it becomes clear that they can't get confirmed that the Senate is in, and Thune takes the chamber out of session for a prolonged period of time to allow Trump to essentially go around them, that would be extraordinary. And while he certainly hasn't ruled it out, I wouldn't read what he said today as saying he's ready to do that tomorrow.
Maggie, does the president-elect see the Senate as pliant, and is he planning accordingly?
The president-elect sees the Senate as better for him than it was the last time that he was in office. The last time he was in office, Mitch McConnell was the majority leader, and Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump were not friends, and they were not like minds. And I do think that you are certainly going to see a majority leader who is more favorable to Trump and more willing to do things that Trump demands directly. But that does not mean that there are not going to be some senators who break away for their own purposes on specifically on certain appointments. And we'll see what this looks like.
So finally, Trump himself returned to Washington, and most specifically to the White House today, triumphantly. And he ends up in a meeting in the White House. I think we should just pause to reflect on how absolutely strange that encounter must have been, given what happened 4 years ago, right, Peter?
Yeah. Look, first of all, Trump did not extend Biden the same courtesy 4 years ago. Biden is trying to say, well, I'm going to follow the protocols, I'm going to follow tradition, I'm going to show the way it's supposed to be done, even if it kills me. If you watch the tape of them having this meeting today, it looked like it was about to kill him. Neither of them said anything nice about each other, but they were certainly, civil.
I do want to interrupt Michael just for 1 second because we have more breaking news, which is that President-elect Trump just announced that Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida is going to be his nominee for Attorney General.
Wow.
This is getting a bit precarious for them. They are only on track to hold the House by about 4 or 5 seats, maybe at the most.
Should we point out that Matt Gaetz has some serious ethical
investigated by the department they're about to put him under?
He's been accused of sexual misconduct.
But Peter, so is the president who nominated him. He has denied allegations against him, just to be clear. I don't quite know what this looks like in terms of a confirmation hearing, but this will be potentially another test.
Okay, but just to conclude this remarkable exchange between Biden and Trump, I heard Trump, when he said, thank you very much, politics is tough, it's not nice, but it's a nice world today. Is that the closest thing to an olive branch that he may ever extend to Joe Biden?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think what these two men said about each other, right? Biden said for years that Trump was not fit to be president, that he was a threat to democracy, that he was dangerous. He said many other things, of course. Trump, of course, has said many of the same things about Biden and, by the way, promised to appoint a special counsel to investigate Biden and the whole, quote, Biden crime family, including his son, once he gets in office. Whether he follows through or not, we don't know.
Right. Just as a final note, in Biden's conduct, I think we also saw something really interesting. He was sitting there almost kind of forcing normalcy back into the system.
Oh, I think that's exactly right. I think it's a very good way to put it. He is determined not to let Trump change him. That tradition and protocol and civility and decency still matter. The question here, of course, is whether or not Trump then follows suit. At the same time, you know, I think that he's got so many things on his plate, policy-wise, you could argue, and I think some of the people around him are arguing, that let's not spend our time on the retribution you promised. Let's focus on the deportations and the tariffs and all the other really important and difficult policy initiatives he's outlined. We'll see where that goes, but I think history has given us a pretty good map.
I don't think that anyone would be surprised to know that Donald Trump generally views the world sort of in walking casino terms, which is heads he wins and tails you lose. And so if Joe Biden is adhering to norms because Joe Biden believes in those norms, and Trump believes in these things if they work for him, and if they don't work for him, then he's going to buck against them. And as we have seen, our country discovered after the 2016 election how much of our system is based on norms and not laws. And that is going to be shown again in the coming months.
Peter, Julie, Maggie, we really appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
There'll be more.
There'll be more.
Keep left. The Daily is supported by BetterHelp, committed to helping clients with issues ranging from relationship challenges and goal setting to grief and depression. Learn more at betterhelp.com/public. And by Total Wine and More, where shoppers can find a great Cabernet, bourbon, or sparkling wine for everyone on their holiday list. Total Wine and More helps shoppers find what they love and love what they find. Drink responsibly. Be 21.
The Daily is powered by the journalism of the New York Times and is distributed by APM, American Public Media. You can go deeper into the stories you hear on The Daily at nytimes.com/The Daily. That's it for The Daily. I'm Michael Lombardo. See you tomorrow.
Hi, this is Matt Harrop. There's been a lot of news to cover in Houston over the last few months. Keep listening to Houston Public Media for the latest, and if you've got a car, truck, boat, or RV you don't need anymore, donate it to the station. It could be worth hundreds of dollars in support. The donation process is easy for you, and we'll pick up your vehicle in any condition. Here's how to get started. Go to HoustonPublicMedia.org/cars to learn more. Thank you.
President-elect Trump was president-elected because he promised Americans he'd fix the economy. One plank of his platform, tariffs.
The word tariff, properly used, is a beautiful word.
A tariff is a tax on imported goods, so tariffs on China mean that things coming from China will cost more. Is more expensive good? Donald Trump is making a genuinely
dry cleaning. And yet most of us vote for a higher minimum wage because we think it's fair. And I think that you have to sort of look at tariffs the same way, is that the people who are looking at Trump's plan and saying, his plan means higher costs for me, are also saying, but there's also a question for fairness here. Is it fair that I get cheaper prices on everything, but communities that depended on the production of the products that are now made in China are withering away and dying?
Coming up on Today Explained.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. President-elect Trump's pick for Attorney General, Florida Republican Matt Gaetz, has resigned from his House seat, but some Republican senators want to see a House ethics report looking into allegations of sex trafficking and illicit drug use by Gaetz. NPR's Alina Moore has more.
The House Ethics Committee can no longer pursue its investigation of Matt Gaetz, but its findings remain a variable in his nomination for Attorney General. Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn is a senior member of the Judiciary Committee. He wants to see all relevant information when deciding on Gaetz, and that includes the report.
I don't think any of us want to fly blind, and because that wouldn't be discharging our responsibilities. But again, part of this is to protect the president against information or surprises coming out later that he and his team weren't aware of.
Cornyn added he's open to subpoenaing the investigation's findings if necessary. Elena Moore, NPR News, The Capitol.
Negotiators at a UN climate conference are trying to hammer out a funding agreement to help developing countries deal with global warming. NPR's Michael Copley reports the talks are slow going.
The president of this year's meeting, Mukhtar Babayev, says money is urgently needed to cut climate pollution and protect people from worsening disasters.
We must act now. Failure to do so will have grave human and economic costs.
But leaders are struggling to agree on a plan to aid developing nations, says EU negotiator Jacob Worksman.
It's hard to see exactly where the landing grounds lie at the moment.
Developing countries want more than $1 trillion a year from their wealthier neighbors, a sharp increase from current levels, but still just a portion of what researchers say they need. Michael Copley, NPR News.
Stocks ended lower across the board on Wall Street today. This is NPR. Ever since Hurricane Milton ripped the fabric roof off of Tropicana Field in St. Petersburg, Florida, the question of where the Tampa Bay Rays will play Major League Baseball next season was up in the air. But as Sky LeBron of member station WUSF reports, the Rays have found a temporary solution.
The Rays will play their home games next year at Steinbrenner Field, the spring training ballpark for the New York Yankees. It's about 21 miles and a long bridge away from Tropicana Field. The city of St. Petersburg, which owns the Trop, released an assessment that says the stadium needs roughly $56 million in repairs to be ready for the 2026 season. This all comes as the city and Pinellas County are working on the final touches for a new $1.3 billion stadium deal, but that won't be ready for the Rays until 2028 at the earliest. For NPR News, I'm Sky LeBron in Tampa.
In Minnesota, one of the country's largest meat processors, Smithfield, has agreed to a $2 million settlement after a state labor department found the packaged meat company employed at least 11 children at its plant in St. James. Virginia-based Smithfield denies knowingly hiring minors to work at the plant. The Labor Department investigation found kids as young as 14 years old performing potentially dangerous work over a 2-year period from 2021 to 2023. This is NPR.
There's more to the story at HoustonPublicMedia.org. From in-depth coverage of issues affecting all Texans to informing you about the latest breaking news, we prioritize exceptional reporting that's always available on your favorite device. Join us daily for political news that puts substance over sensationalism and community news that shines a light on voices across Houston and beyond. Anytime, anywhere, there's always more to the story at HoustonPublicMedia.org.
Support comes from Rocco, continuing the Unchambered series featuring hornist Bernard Scully and percussionist Matthew McClung at the Dan Flavin installation at Richmond Hall, Thursday, November 21st at 7 p.m. Tickets and more at roco.org. Support comes from Asia Society, Texas, presenting Space City, Art in the Age of Artemis, an exhibition featuring 31 contemporary artists exploring the mysteries of outer space. More at asiasociety.org/Texas.
You're listening to Today Explained. I'm Noelle King. Earlier this week, the president-elect told his allies that he wants Robert Lighthizer to be his U.S. trade representative. That's the person who sets trade policy. Mr. Lighthizer was in this role from 2017 to 2021, and like Trump, he loves a tariff. So to ask what this might mean for America, we called Greg Ip, the chief economics commentator for the Wall Street Journal, who says Donald Trump is, at the very least, consistent.
Well, he has been arguing more or less for his entire life, but especially in his last term as president and this term, that other countries take advantage of the United States. They sell us cheap products, but they don't buy anything from us. And as a result, the United States has a large trade deficit with most countries. And he would argue it's why we've lost a lot of good manufacturing jobs.
I put a 50% tax on China steel coming in, and every person in the steel industry, when they see me, they started crying. They would hug me. They would kiss me. Sir, you saved our industry.
He says the solution is to raise tariffs on those imports, which would reduce trade deficits, force those countries to treat the United States more fairly, and bring back some of those good manufacturing jobs that have been lost over the last 10 to 20 years. Now, there's a wide debate among economists about just how effective this would be. But in terms of the messaging, there's no question that, especially to blue-collar or former blue-collar workers in a lot of those battleground states, that kind of message resonated.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that Donald Trump has a kind of unified theory on trade. Trade is a reality of economic life these days. What is Trump's theory on it, and how does it differ from his predecessors?
In the United States, since the 1940s at least, there's been a bipartisan consensus that more trade is good.
We cannot protect our economy by stagnating behind tariff walls, but that the best protection possible is a mutual lowering of tariff barriers among friendly nations, so that all may benefit from the free flow of goods.
We must expand world trade. Having recognized the Act of 1962 that we must buy as well as sell, we now expect our trading partners to recognize that we must sell as well as buy.
Instead of closing markets at home, we've opened markets to U.S. products abroad, thus helping to create more American jobs.
So you've seen generally tariffs in the United States decline and tariffs in our trading partners decline, and you've seen the United States embrace more free trade agreements, such as with Mexico, such as with Korea, such as with Canada, such as the creation of the World Trade Organization. And this came from a bipartisan view that this made our workers more productive because they had bigger markets to sell into. It benefited our consumers because they got cheaper goods and a greater variety of goods. And it was also good for the U.S. geopolitically because it helped us increase our economic bonds to countries in our that thought the same we did politically. For example, it increased the strength of our alliances with Europe and with Japan and Korea.
Our peaceful trading partners are not our enemies. They are our allies. We should beware of the demagogues who are ready to declare a trade war against our friends, weakening our economy, our national security, and the entire free world, all while cynically waving the American flag.
Trump comes along and he argues this entire regime has been much more to the advantage of other countries than it has been to the United States. Countries like Japan and then Germany and now China have taken advantage of the United States' fixation on free trade to increase their trade surplus with the U.S., sell us lots of manufactured goods, and not buy very much from the United States.
And I want German car companies to become American car companies. I want them to build their plants here. I want to beat China in electronics production, and we'll be able to do that easily.
So his entire mission, from his first term and now into this one, is to reverse that relationship, and he hopes force those countries to buy more from the U.S. and Americans to buy more from each other instead from imports. That's the theory, anyway.
Donald Trump had a chance to do all of this from 2016 to 2020 when he was in office. What did he do?
So Donald Trump's first term in office, a lot of people thought, oh, this guy's coming in, he's a protectionist, he's going to destroy the world trading system. In the end, he did not. He did raise tariffs. For example, in a series of rounds of tariff increases, he imposed tariffs on a wide range of products from China. And this was pursuant to a long-running case that complained that China was just systematically unfair to the United States, stealing our technology and putting up barriers to U.S. exports to China. Then he imposed a variety of more bespoke tariffs on particular products.
The new taxes will hit a wide range of Chinese imports, raising prices on items such as air conditioners, TVs, boats, furniture, and toys.
The tariffs on washing machines will affect popular South Korean brands LG and Samsung. The tariff on solar panels will be 30% in the first year.
The White House announced that they were going to expand the steel and aluminum tariffs.
But when all was said and done, what was interesting was that the total increase in tariffs for the United States was actually rather minor. And one of the reasons for that was because, first of all, there were many exemptions. And second of all, because often Trump decided that rather than stick with the high tariffs, he would strike a new deal with some of these countries. So, for example, with Canada and Mexico, he said, I really don't like the North American Free Trade Agreement that my predecessors negotiated. We'll replace this with a better agreement. And they did. And they called it the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And because of that, the tariffs that Trump imposed on some imports from Canada and Mexico went away. As a result, at the end of Trump's term, you ended up with a trading system that looked a lot like it did before Trump, except with a few more bespoke tariffs here and there, and perhaps a little less deference to international rules, such as those that are enforced by the World Trade Organization.
So at the end of that first term, had Donald Trump gotten what he wanted? Had his plan worked?
If the test of Donald Trump's trade policy was a smaller trade deficit, then no, he didn't really achieve what he wanted. The trade deficit when he left office was larger in dollar terms than when he entered office. Did some manufacturing jobs come back? Possibly in this industry, that industry, but there also appear to have been some costs. There were industries that had to pay more for their inputs because of tariffs, and they lost sales and possibly jobs.
People we've spoken to here in the community are concerned and shocked by this news. They thought that these steel tariffs were going to bring back production and bring back jobs, but instead, U.S. Steel announcing that they are going to temporarily be laying off about 200 workers.
And then, of course, some of our trading partners retaliated.
China says it will now slap tariffs on $60 billion of U.S. goods. A foreign ministry spokesman said mutual respect is the only right way out of this trade dispute, but the U.S. shows no sincerity or goodwill.
You did see some interesting changes in patterns of trade. So, for example, our trade deficit with China did begin to shrink.
Go straight
At the same time, though, you saw our trade deficit with Mexico and Vietnam grow. And what that told us is that some businesses responded to Trump's tariffs not necessarily by bringing production back to the United States, but by moving it to another country, out of China, into Vietnam, into Mexico, that were not quite as affected by the tariffs.
So Donald Trump had a chance. He did what he was going to do, and now he gets a second term, and he said he's going to do things differently. What are Donald Trump's plans for his second term?
The throughput of his campaign rhetoric was as follows. He wants to, number one, come down even harder on China. Instead of just putting tariffs on about half of China's imports, he's talked about a tariff of a tariff on all of Chinese imports of as much as 60%. And in addition, instead of sparing traditional U.S. allies, he wants to impose an across-the-board tariff on everybody of, say, 10 to 20%. So if you thought that you would escape Trump's tariffs by moving production out of China, maybe you won't, because the country you move it to will also face U.S. tariffs. And finally, maybe there weren't that many jobs created in the United States in his first term because the tariffs weren't broad enough. Maybe you'll see some jobs created that you didn't before because he's hitting a much broader range of products with tariffs. But there's a very big caveat to this, Noel, which is that we don't really know if Trump will end up doing exactly what he's talked about. We know that Trump likes tariffs, but we also know that Trump likes to make deals.
It gives you power in dealing with other countries, because China would come in and say, no more tax, no more tax. They were absolutely fine for me to deal with because they were so petrified of me putting on additional tariffs.
And so, as in his first term, we might see that the threat of tariffs is primarily a leverage instrument, a negotiating chip, in which he goes to countries that he thinks treats the United States unfairly and says, here are some things we want you to do differently, and if you do as we ask, then we won't hit you with the tariffs that I've talked about.
Greg Ip is the Wall Street Journal's chief economics commentator. All right, so that's The View from the USA. Coming up, we're going to zip abroad where terrified businesses and nations are reacting in terror.
Today Explained is supported by Progressive Insurance. From the moment car insurance is quoted to the moment it's purchased, drivers can discover a variety of ways to stay protected. More at Progressive.com. Today Explained is supported by BetterHelp, committed to making mental well-being a priority and offering support in taking on everything life demands, with therapists available to communicate via video, chat, or phone at BetterHelp.com/public.
It's one thing to love public radio, but it's a special thing to support it. Consider this. If you've got a car you don't need anymore, or you've got one that's simply too expensive to repair, you can arrange to donate it to Houston Public Media. We take any kind of vehicle in any condition. It's easy for you, pickup is free, and it could be worth hundreds of dollars in support. Visit HoustonPublicMedia.org/cars to learn more. And thanks.
From the money surrounding Michelin Guide restaurant honors to a ride-sharing service that may come to Houston featuring armed drivers, this week's non-expert panel considers intrigues in the news on the good, the bad, and the ugly on the next Houston Matters.
Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock here on News 88.7.
Support comes from the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University, presenting a Fall Chamber Music Festival this Friday through Sunday. The full schedule of 9 concerts is at music.rice.edu.
It's Today Explained. As Greg Ip of the Wall Street Journal was telling us before, the point of a tariff might be to make a country or a company change their behavior. So stop making your shoes in China, make them in the U.S. instead. That'll be great for America, Donald Trump is betting. But what will it mean for the rest of the world? Last week, just a few days after the election, the shoe giant Steve Madden gave us a peek.
Steve Madden boots are made for walking, and that's just what they're doing right out of China, thanks to...
2/3 of the shoes it sells in the U.S. are imported, 70% of those from China. The company's CEO now telling investors that will change.
It's as if, Greg Ip, Donald Trump is already winning.
Here's the catch, though. They're not bringing that shoe production back to the United States because the United States is a very expensive place to make shoes. Instead, they're moving it to other countries in Southeast Asia and Latin America. So tariffs don't simply reduce imports or increase exports. They change patterns of trade. So Steve Madden and every company like them is basically in their heads trying to juggle a whole bunch of competing possibilities. Number one, the shoes that we make in China will be much more expensive in the U.S. market because of these tariffs. So we either swallow that tariff ourselves. Oh, we can't do that. That's too bad for profits. We pass that on to customers. Oh, we're going to lose some sales because the shoes are more expensive. Or we find another place to make our shoes. And it looks like that for now, they're going with option C. They're going to try and find another place to make those shoes. Now, obviously, the reason they chose China in the first place was because they thought China was a cheaper, more efficient place to make them than some other place. So in moving from China to, say, Cambodia or Mexico, they will be sacrificing something. They'll be sacrificing the efficiency of the Chinese internal supply chain, perhaps the productivity of Chinese labor, the ease of getting stuff into container ships in China and bring them to the United States. So once they make this production change, it is probably still the case that the shoes that come to the United States will not be as cheap as they were when they were coming from China. Now, here in the United States, if you're a shoe buyer, you're going to go into the store, and that shoe that used to cost $80 maybe it costs a few dollars more as a result. And you're going to have to make a decision. Are you going to go ahead and pay those extra few dollars, or are you going to not buy shoes at all? Or are you going to buy shoes from a different manufacturer? And what we've seen from studies, for example, is that you see an adjustment across all these facets. You see a little bit of an increase in the domestic price, a little bit of an increase in purchases from other sources, and a little bit of a shifting of purchases from the supplier that was hit with the tariffs to the supplier that's not.
Go straight on.
And I would anticipate that every U.S. company is going through a similar calculation. But by the way, Noel, the Trump people are also going through a similar calculation. They know perfectly well that if they impose tariffs on everything, people's toys are going to be more expensive, people's avocados are going to be more expensive, your iPhone is going to be more expensive, and people aren't going to like that. And if it causes an inflation problem, that could also push up interest rates, and people aren't going to like that either. And that's one of the reasons why I emphasize that just because Trump talked about tariffs in a certain way, it's not a guarantee that that's what we'll actually get. There will be a lot of thinking and negotiating and study about how those tariffs are implemented, and is there a way that they can exempt certain products or certain countries so that there isn't as much of an impact on the U.S. consumer.
All right, so we understand why China would be frantic. Where else in the world is looking at Donald Trump's threats of tariffs and really freaking out?
The first country that needs to worry is China, for all the reasons that we've been discussing. The second country that needs to really worry is Germany, maybe Europe more broadly, but especially Germany, because even though Germany is an ally and we don't think of them as a fair trader, we think of China. Like China, Germany has historically depended heavily on exports for its economic model, and that includes exports to the United States and exports to China. And right now, Germany is looking at a threat to both of those markets. They're finding that their sales to China are suffering because Chinese companies are competing with German companies and producing the same products, often for a much lower price and almost as good quality.
Straight on.
So the German companies are worrying about losing sales in China and, frankly, losing sales within Europe to China's competition. Now they look across the ocean, and their other big market, the United States, they're worried about what happens there. Holy cow, if Donald Trump imposes really steep tariffs on our automobiles, on our chemicals, on our motorcycles, all these other products, that's another loss of economic growth for us. And this all occurs at a time when the European economy, its own domestic economy, its consumers are incredibly weak. Germany is virtually in recession right now. So I think it's not exaggeration to say that they are, as we say in economics, freaking out.
Donald Trump has also been very antagonistic toward our neighbor, Mexico. Now, I read, I was looking into this earlier this week, and I read that Mexico's economy minister said, we might just do the same thing. We might just retaliate and put tariffs on U.S. imports. What would that mean, and why don't more countries just threaten to do that? If you're going to do this to us, we'll do it to you.
Well, I expect that countries that are hit with tariffs or threatened with tariffs will, in fact, threaten to retaliate, and I expect that some will, in fact, go through that retaliation. And I think that is something of a flaw in the Trump argument. If you go back to his first term, when they hit our allies with tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, a lot of people in the Trump administration said they won't retaliate. The U.S. market is too important to them. Well, that was only partly true. Japan and South Korea, for example, did not retaliate, but Canada did.
Let me be clear. These tariffs are totally unacceptable.
Mexico did, and the European Union did.
It will hurt the European Union. It will put thousands of European jobs in jeopardy, and it has to be met by a firm and proportionate response.
And that had very severe negative consequences. It had hurt American farmers. It hurt, exporters of whiskey to the European market, for one example.
We have to plan 2, 3, 4, 5 years out for sales because we're putting that whiskey into barrels today. Making decisions today that could overcommit the amount of cash into your inventory could be devastating.
So that's where the conflicting feelings are. We don't understand why, we're kind of collateral damage.
So I think that it is definitely the case that you will see our trading partners say, we will not take this lying down, okay? Remember, they have domestic audiences too. Just